thank you for joining us. We are here today to talk about the PY20 monitoring season and to provide you with some updates on the process and a description of the tools and the procedures that will take place to test your financial monitoring processes and records. I am joined today by some members of the Grants Administration / Finance team. I am happy to have Mr. Scott Levitt, Ms. Janice Banks, and Mr. Kenneth Slade with me today. Thank you in advance, each of you, for your knowledge and expertise on this subject. We'll discuss some of the primary financial procedures. Of course, the time limitations for this presentation do not permit us to have a detailed discussion of every aspect of the process. Much of what you are familiar with regard to on-site monitoring will be mirrored in this year's process, but there are some key things that we'd like to focus on and bring your attention to as we prepare for this upcoming season, to include some changes to the process, the financial samples that we will request from you, and some of the more pertinent facts of the tools that we use to determine your compliance. So what's changing about the process? We have a number of small tweaks to what we're doing that we intend to add efficiency and effectiveness to the process and kind of tie the various pieces of the monitoring review together more cohesively in a way that would make sense to the grantees and to the state staff, the reviewers in the process. But one substantial change that we would like to highlight is the schedule with which we will request and review some of the samples. In particular, in order to add to the efficiency of the process, we will begin to test some tools in advance of the on-site monitoring process. And in order to make that advanced portion happen, we will need some samples prior to our arrival on site. With regard to the schedule for financial samples, new this year and moving forward, 5 days after the Office of Workforce Development receives the data documents from the local area, we will send a request for financial samples to the local workforce area. This is 1 week earlier than we have previously requested the financial samples. We are doing this in order to accommodate our need to test some samples prior to our arrival on site. 2 weeks prior to the on-site review portion, the Office of Workforce Development will send a request for the first set of disbursement samples. The disbursement samples are related to the payments that have been sent to the local area as a part of the drawdown process during the season, during the period being monitored. 1 week prior to the on-site review portion, the local area must submit financial samples for the following tools only: policy testing tool, the prepaids testing tool, the contracting testing tool, the subrecipient monitoring tool, and the financial management tool. These are the portions that we will test prior to our arrival on site. At the beginning of the on-site review process, OWD will request a second set of disbursement samples from the local area. This mirrors the process as it has existed in the past, and we will use these disbursements to provide an opportunity to test additional supporting documentation related to drawdown requests and monies received. Now I will turn the presentation over to Kip to talk about the policy testing tool.
So the policy testing tool is used to ascertain whether a grantee has policies to comply with all areas of federal grant regulations, including cash management, contract provisions, travel regulations, cost allocations, and inventory. The grantee is required to provide a copy of local policies and supportive resources. The Office Workforce Development staff will review policy language to confirm that it contains the required components. The next one is the prepaid testing tool. The Office of Workforce Development utilizes the prepaid testing tool to review the grantee's use, management, and protection of advanced purchase commodities, for example, transportation vouchers, that are used to fill a particular need for select participants. The tool brings attention to grantees' inventory procedures, storage, as well as distribution and tracking mechanisms. The prepaid testing tool is only used when a grantee has purchased prepaid items using funding provided by the Office of Workforce Development. Samples may include local policy authorization, procurement receipts, supporting documentation, inventory records, and trackers. The subrecipient monitoring testing tool is used to verify that the grantee has sufficient monitoring procedures in place for comprehensive oversight of its subrecipient contracts. Grantees are reminded to accurately distinguish between a vendor contract and a subrecipient entity. The Office of Workforce Development will review subrecipient policy and methodology, subrecipient contracts and provisions, subrecipient monitoring tools, corrective action reports and files, and supporting documentation. Subrecipient testing, reminders, and updates. Local areas should clearly distinguish between subrecipient contracts and vendor contracts. Subrecipient contracts are evaluated differently, for example, using more criteria. The subrecipient sample that the Office of Workforce Development tests as a part of the contracting tool will be the subrecipient sample that is tested as a part of the subrecipient monitoring tool. Local areas should provide all supporting documentation for subrecipient monitoring, including testing tools, correspondence regarding corrective actions, etc.
Okay, thank you, Kip. So I would like to discuss the purchasing tool. The purpose of this purchasing tool is for the Office of Workforce Development Finance team to utilize by performing all purchasing samples selected. What we would do is Office of Workforce Development Finance Monitor will review the procurement policies and procedures for the following. We would look at purchase, demonstrated, open and free competition. We would also look at description of goods and services. We'll be looking at adequate documentation of procurement transactions. We'll be looking at cost analysis that was performed during that monitoring period, conflicts of interest, appropriate prior approvals, etc. This list is not comprehensive. We do look at multiple purchasing items, large and small purchases. So this is not a comprehensive list. This is just to give you an overview. One-stop operated tool will be used, and the purpose of this tool is for Office of Workforce Development Finance team to utilize the finance portion of this tool when the local workforce development area procured or renewed the one-stop operator. Office of Workforce Development Finance Monitor will answer 6 questions related to the financial fiscal accountability. The local workforce development area will need to ensure the following is in place. The local workforce development area requests for proposal documentation, procurement policy and procedures, bidders proposed budget, narrative, taxes, and accounting systems. Also, evaluation factors, which is also called decision factors, must be in place. Another tool is salary and cost allocation tool. The purpose is the Office of Workforce Development Finance team will utilize this tool by reviewing samples and answering questions related to the following. We will be looking at the cost allocation and disbursements. We'll also be looking at entities, costs, allocation plan, and whether that plan has been updated in the last 2 years. We have personnel activity reports, payroll, and salary testing. We'll also be looking at indirect cost testing, if applicable and approved. ETA, which is also called the Employment and Training Appropriated Funds, salary cap documentation will also be reviewed. Thank you, and I'd like to turn it over to Scott.
Thank you, Janice. So we're going to look at financial management. So the financial management portion will interview key members in key positions, the financial leader or manager of a workforce office, the human resource manager of the workforce office, and the procurement manager of the workforce office for our local area. We will also be looking at cash management, which looks at verifying bank statements, monthly bank statements from the local areas. We will check financial reports and FSRs, check for any advances that were made to OWD, and check for any noted items that may have been flagged by the OWD finance team throughout the year. We will also be looking at contracting testing tool. We will be looking at the subrecipient contract that should clearly list contract provisions required under local, state, and federal law, provide a complete signed contract that includes the contractor name, contract amount, any amendments, and copies of subcontracts and memorandums of agreement if applicable. Contract should include scope of work, requirements, deliverables, and outline for measuring performance. Contracts, of course, are approved and signed based on board delegation of authority. And a funding source, whether it be youth, dislocated worker, or adult, must be clearly identified. We will also be looking at contract management. Contract administration procedures must be performed and documented. The contract file must be maintained. Process approved contract payments will be looked at, and contract activities will be periodically monitored. The contract monitoring process must also be performed and documented. And finally, we will look at dispersed bit testing. These will have items that are reviewed, which include financial samples of the disbursement cover sheet, monthly statements associated with credit card disbursements, and monthly statements associated with travel and non-travel reimbursements.
Thank you, everyone. This concludes our presentation on monitoring processes for the PY20 review. If you have any questions or would like to request technical assistance, please reach out to your assigned grant specialist or to me. I am always available to you. Thank you.